Hi, Anne.
Hi. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Okay. How do you pronounce your name?
Ijama.
Ijama. Okay, nice to meet you, Ijama.
Nice to meet you. Now, I'm very excited for today's book talk. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always weird to write a book because like you spend all these years and then you have to come out of your little cave and see if anybody likes it. For me.
I
My
I
first
definitely
book, so I never had this experience before.
well, there's a first for everything. And
Right.
yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I literally worked at a grocery store at the like exact same time that you wrote the book.
No
So I'm like,
kidding. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so I was
Okay.
even like when I was reading, I was like, oh my God, like this is I was like, these are so many like topics that I'm like I wasn't able to like articulate.
Hmm.
Like I wasn't able to articulate and connect it to policy like back then, but I was like, something's lingering here. Even from the way you described, oh, it's like more comfortable to work at least being at the cashier because the mat's on the floor and it's more comfortable. Like such
Hmm.
minute things that I can remember
Right.
from my time working. And I
Well,
was
you
like,
should feel free to like jump in during the chat
yeah.
and, just throw your experience in. I think we need that.
No, it was an amazing read, so I loved it. I'm
Thank
very
you.
excited to dive into this discussion.
Thanks. 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 Are you guys, is it like a heat wave out there?
I am in
Oh,
Georgia,
you're in Georgia.
so
Okay.
so it's not too bad right now.
Hmm.
Usually very hot, but I think it's like we just had a bunch of rain right now, so it's pretty normal. But I do know the DC and New York
They're
folks
suffering. Yeah.
they've been
Yeah.
suffering.
Yesterday here, I'm in Salt Lake, it was 109, which was the highest recorded temperature in history.
Oh,
So, yeah.
wow.
Or at least in like many decades. So we are all suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, I just lost like a tree like outside my place, so I can already tell like it's getting hotter on average because the shade that was cooling it is like they just like took down a bunch of trees.
Oh
And I'm like,
no.
right, do
Why? Why'd
it.
they take him down?
Don't know, can't tell you. Like
Oh.
I have asked the question too. So it's like I can gradually feel it getting like hotter because it's just more
Mm-hmm.
cement and not enough
Mm-hmm.
shade in this area.
Oh no. That's upsetting. Yeah.
We live, and hopefully the turn of the season comes below.
Right? We really need that.
Hmm.
Yeah. What part of Georgia are you in?
I am in, I'm like about 50 minutes like northwest of Atlanta.
Hmm. Okay. Hmm.
So I'm not too far. That 50 minutes probably turns into 2 hours though in regular Atlanta
Traffic.
traffic.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. And is that where you're from?
No, I'm actually originally from Illinois.
Okay.
And then my family moved down here when I was halfway through
All
college.
right.
So
Gotcha.
we've been here for about 3, 4 years.
Hmm. Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that's cool that you can work remotely. Technology makes that possible.
Yes, it is very
It's
helpful.
better than the supermarket.
But you gotta be in person
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
Were you working in like a big chain or was it a smaller
Yeah,
store?
I was at Mariano's, so I was at a Kroger store.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Were you
we were
cashier?
I was cashier. I was working on the front
Hmm.
end. I was hired
Hmm.
as a front end associate, but I was mostly cashiering. Maybe I was bagging
Hmm.
some days, but especially during like 2020, 2021, it was very, very unique experience.
Yeah, totally. Hmm.
Um,
What are some of the standout memories that you have from that period?
well, already you opened up your book talking about that you like if you wanted to unionize. And I was like, one thing I will say that was unique was definitely that we were unionized.
Oh,
And
okay.
then and
Yeah.
then like after my first month, like was when Illinois was raising the minimum wage. So we saw the changes of like them also like trying to like gradually raise our
Hmm.
pay
Hmm.
since the Illinois minimum wage changed, but the consequence was we were getting our hours cut. Um,
No
for sure.
kidding.
Yeah, that we were getting our hours cut. So it was like, oh, this
So you
trade-off.
saw that was a backlash against the state raising the wage?
Yeah, there was. However, I don't know if everybody was affected by like hour cut. I think they try to protect like people who were full-time because
Hmm.
technically I was only full-time during like seasons because I was in school during the
Hmm.
time. So I think they at least try to like may obviously maintain the hours of like full-time workers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that meant I also had like a different pay time off scheme and everything than full-time workers, which it
Wow.
was at least a bit more generous.
I mean, I
Um,
never, my store wasn't unionized, so I have no, did you feel like the union was good? Was it, like, were you glad to be in one? Was it helpful? Like, what were the,
I
yeah.
was glad to be in one because I
Hmm.
kind of already came into like at least like a better situation that
Hmm.
was a bit more worker
Hmm.
oriented, like
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
store. Um, I wasn't very as especially as a teenager, I wasn't like super involved in a lot of these efforts, but I always knew about them, like
Yeah, yeah.
with like when there were problems like with management that were brought up, like the union was very good on lean with that.
Can
So
I
I
ask what was the average hourly?
It
Do you,
was when I started, it was like 11, and then halfway when I was
hmm.
through, it went up to 13.50.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then right as I was leaving, it was finally like about to reach 15 to meet
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
Illinois law.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Okay. Hmm.
So it was very unique. Yeah. I will say like I remember you were talking about like go backs and
Yeah, right? Something I
and
totally do not think about as a shopper, but as a worker, you're just like, oh my God.
I thought about that so much when I got to that point. I was like, oh my God, this is so relatable. Because I would volunteer for go backs. I remember when it was like a very long shift,
Mhm.
and I was
Mhm.
like, I need to like walk. Like, I need to get some steps in. And I just need to like go a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. You
So,
want to get away from the check stand. That go backs is the, and then
ex
you can kind of do them a little more slowly than you might like, than the
exactly.
bosses might like. Oh, I'm still looking for this jar of mayonnaise. Hmm.
Yeah, as a all right. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. I am Ijama Abana. I'm a research associate here at the Roosevelt Institute, and I am so excited to kick off the July installment of our book club. Today, I am joined by Ann Larson, a journalist and fellow at the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, on her recently published book, Clean Up on Aisle 5: Essential Work, Poverty, Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. Now, before we get started, I want to go through a run of show and logistics for today before I pivot to Anne to intro the book. First off, this will be mainly a discussion about the book, so I'll give the floor to Anne to introduce the book, and then I will moderate a discussion on some questions about some of the main themes in Clean Up on Aisle 5. And then in the second half of the event, we will go into an open discussion of a Q&A session from questions from all of you in the audience. Once we get to the Q&A section, you'll be able to ask your questions either by dropping them in the chat or using the raise hand function to ask them. All right. And then before kicking us off, I'd like to give a thank you to the Economic Hardship Reporting Project as we are co-hosting this event alongside them. All right. Then I'd like to just jump right in with you, Anne, giving you the floor to give us an up top introduction to Clean Up on Aisle 5.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jama. Thanks for that introduction. I am so happy to be here and so honored to be here. I have really relied on the Roosevelt Institute's research in my research for this book, especially on topics about corporate concentration and price gouging. So thank you very much for all of your work. And also, just a shout out to the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. This book comes out of an article that I wrote for the New Republic back in 2021 about working in a supermarket during the pandemic um, that was supported by economic hardship. So this book wouldn't exist without their support. And just to mention the founder, Barbara Ehrenreich of Economic Hardship, who's also her book Nickel and Dimed is a big influence on me and her work in general on economic precarity. So just to mention I'm part of that tradition and proud to be. So I'm the author of Cleanup on Aisle 5, Essential Work, Poverty, Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. At the outset of the COVID pandemic, I got a job in a supermarket. I had hit a period of unemployment. I was kind of in a low point, you might say, in my professional life. I'm from the mountain states, but I was living in New York City at the time. I had attended the City University of New York, where I got my PhD. But around 2019, 2020, I found myself unemployed. My professional opportunities had kind of dried up. I moved back to my home region of Utah to sort of make a new start, figure out what was next. And my timing was really poor because the pandemic kicked off and I was unable to find work. I sent out a lot of resumes to, white collar jobs, and didn't hear much back. City was shutting down, and I needed an income. I didn't have health insurance either, and that concerned me. I started shopping in a supermarket near where I lived. It's a very large store. And I would go in there and I was really impressed by these workers who showed up every day, punching a clock. They were smiling and happy, gave great customer service during this health crisis. And I was impressed by that. Schools were closed, other businesses were shut down, and here were these people coming to work. And I also think I felt a little guilty that here these people were making sure I could buy groceries. So I thought, why don't I apply it? If I get hired, get a job in the store, I could do this. I could work as long as I need to until this pandemic ends, until I can get to the other side of this and figure out what's next. So that's how I got a job in the store. I did not intend to write about working in a supermarket, but something happened a couple of months in that made me rethink that. There was a day when I came to work and one of my colleagues, I was standing by the time clock getting ready to punch in, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, did you know a guy defecated on the floor today?" She used another word, which I won't use in this context, but she's like, we both knew what had happened. We had a public bathroom, but you had to have a code to get in that you got when you bought something. So the bathroom was available to people who bought something. And what people who are unhoused or who didn't have any money would often do is wait outside the door, wait outside the bathroom door. So when a customer exited, they could grab the door and go in. So we both knew that what had happened is this person had been waiting outside the door, but it didn't open in time. And so he dropped his pants and defecated on the floor. And this incident created a split in the store. It was a big topic of conversation that day. There were some workers defended the man. They said he was probably homeless or he didn't have any money and this is his only option and we can't really blame him. But others were offended and very angry that this person had kind of defiled our workplace like this. And when I got to my register, one of my colleagues, a security guard, he said to me, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "Yeah, somebody told me." And he said, "Well," he wanted to know what side of the split I was on, what I thought about it. And I said, "Well, everybody has to defecate somewhere." And that was my way of sort of defending, this person. And the security guard got a little angry with me and he sort of snapped at me and he said, "Jane had to clean it up." And what he was telling me that was this incident, created extra labor for somebody, your colleague, somebody who works in the store with you had to do this nasty job. And that really kind of woke me up. And I realized the supermarket was this kind of complicated place full of contradiction, and that I had a lot to learn, as an employee about what was going on there, sort of behind the scenes. And that's when I started thinking about writing a book, articles or a book that it eventually became, and that's Cleanup on Aisle 5. So that's sort of how I got a job in the store and why I started thinking about writing about the job.
Wonderful. I think you gave us a great introduction for what the supermarket kind of represents. And it does represent this microcosm of like
Mhm.
community and showing that split. So you mentioned that you started working at TGS, which is how you refer to your employer, during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a time when it seemed that the grocery store was recognized as this very critical pillar of community and for providing these necessary public goods under one roof, and workers were appreciated, at least publicly, for providing these services on the front line and considered essential workers, which they are. So I think what I'm interested in asking is that was there a dichotomy for you and your colleagues between how the grocery store was celebrated during this time versus your lived realities as workers within the institution?
Yeah, yeah, there was a dichotomy. One of the reasons I wrote the book is that I don't want us to forget, what was revealed during the pandemic about what kinds of jobs are socially valuable in society. We all remember this term essential worker, that became popularized during that moment. Certainly, healthcare workers fall into that category, but we also I think realized how much we rely on warehouse workers and meat packers and also grocery workers to show up to their jobs. We couldn't buy groceries if my colleagues and I didn't go to work. For a few months during that time, a few grocery employees even received a bonus pay, and it was called hero pay. So this was kind of an acknowledgement of the risk that people were taking for others, the importance of their work. I think this was kind of an amazing moment, when it was suddenly clear which jobs really mattered. Um, and, because I was on a job then and I was one of those people, I can say that it was a pretty scary time to be working with the public, for obvious reasons. But I was also really proud to do that job. I often really, I was, I loved working with customers. I was really proud to be there in the store. We felt like we were serving the community. We really liked that. But then, as you say, there's this dichotomy. In the book, I refer to it as the split screen, as the metaphor I use. On the one side, you have this like community of caring. First of all, the store is just open. It's full of food and household goods, and it's full of sustenance and delights. Um, and people can come in. We had, like, for example, older people would come in during the early morning hours and like walk the aisles for exercise because very few other places are open for them to do that. But on the other side of the split screen, the supermarket is a pretty dark place. We can start with just the low wages. When I got the job, I was offered 15.85 an hour to work as a supervisor in an area of the store called the front end. That's what we call the check stand area. Most colleagues earned a couple of dollars less than that. Um, and I will quickly learned that a lot of the people that I worked with couldn't afford groceries. So you have to imagine you're part of you're working in a store surrounded by food and you can't afford to buy it. You're struggling to put food on your own table. There was a study a few years ago of employees who worked at Kroger, which is the second largest company in the country, retail company. And about three-quarters of workers at Kroger said they had been what they call food insecure. It's at a certain moment, and so they're hungry. They're going hungry. So this is a huge crisis that people who sell food can't afford to buy it. That I think we need to reckon with as a society. Another part of the sort of dark side of the split screen is injury. I did not know before I got a job in the store how physically dangerous cashiering is. It can seem like light work. You just stand there and you're scanning and chatting with people, and it's actually incredibly physically demanding. Virtually everyone I worked with who had been there very long had some form of repetitive stress injury. Health professionals call them MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders, backaches, pain in the shoulder and the arm from scanning. Scan hundreds of thousands of times a day. Uh, and so this was just and if you think about it, if somebody's um, gets so injured that they can't work anymore, they really don't have much recourse. They can either quit, try to find another job. There's nobody protecting them. My store wasn't unionized. I worked in what the right wing likes to call the right to work state, where there are barriers, legal barriers to unionizing. So people didn't have much recourse when they were suffering. So yeah, there was this dichotomy of incredibly, positive, supermarket's a wonderful place, sense of community, everything's on offer, and also really a very dark environment on the other side.
Yeah, and I know through the book, when you open, you talk about seeing all these things and recognizing them through your work that it made you want to unionize your store. And then also talking about like the shared relationships between workers and also consumers, you talk a lot about. So I think something I wanted to zero in on is that when we're talking a lot about labor organizing, we tend to traditionally zero in on their worker, their plight, their subjugation, as well, like as a result of burgeoning corporate power and the responsibilities to organize. But something that I really like that you do in this book is that you talk about how many consumers don't see how they also share the burden with the laborers. And in the supermarket, you can see that allows for tensions and sometimes resentment to fester between the two. So I think what I would like to ask about is like, what do you believe is the source for fractures in this relationship, especially during your time that you saw in the service industry in the grocery store?
This is such an important point. Another thing that I would not have been able to imagine until I worked in a store is that one of the historical arcs, the book tells the story of my 13 months at TGS, interspersed with analysis, but also stories from history about how we got here to this place where we are and the way the corporate supermarket now works. And one of the historical arcs I trace in the book is how grocery companies have slowly shifted some of the labor, some of the burdens of running the store to shoppers. Um, and that starts, I argue, back in 1916 with the first self-service grocery store. It's called Piggly Wiggly, and it was opened by a entrepreneur called Clarence Saunders. He was the son of a former Confederate soldier, and he opened Piggly Wiggly in 1916 in Tennessee. And before 1916, in grocery stores, or mostly they were mom and pops, all the goods were kept behind a counter. So shoppers would line up at the counter behind their neighbors and they would negotiate with the clerk who would get your sugar or your coffee from behind him and wrap it up for you. Clarence Saunders had this idea that we should just have open shelves where we put things out and customers can walk the aisles and select them. And the reason that he came up with this idea was not necessarily for the convenience of customers, but because it saved on labor. In his patent for the self-service grocery store, he actually said that. He said, we want to eliminate or we want to reduce the number of clerks that are normally paid to wait upon the customer. And so he thought self-service is a way I don't have to hire clerks anymore. I can just have one person at the register and customers can go out into the aisles and make their own choices. And he advertised this. Uh, he wasn't very smart at the beginning. He advertised this as a way to put shoppers to work. Early ad campaigns for Piggly Wiggly were like, come into Piggly Wiggly and put your work shirt on and get to work. Um, and he said at one point, every shopper will be her own clerk. And shoppers didn't really like this. They resisted this idea. Shopping was pretty hard labor during that era, and they didn't like the idea of taking on more of it. So they didn't like Piggly Wiggly. There were problems getting shoppers to come there. So Clarence Saunders changed tactics, and he began advertising self-service as a convenience, as a time saver. And he put out ads that said things like, "You can get in and out of the store in 3 minutes." And this idea that shopping was could be faster, shoppers were willing to accept that trade-off. So then self-service kind of took off and became really, really popular. The next stage in this path of shifting the burden onto shoppers is the shopping cart. Um, until the 1930s, shoppers brought their own baskets or bags to the store, and they tended to only buy what they could carry out by hand, or what they could put in their basket or in their hand basket while they were walking the aisles. And this grocer called Sylvan Goldman, he was in Oklahoma, and in the 1930s, he invented what he called a carrier basket, which was kind of like a crate on wheels. And he introduced that in his store. And once again, at first, shoppers didn't like it. They resisted it. Um, they didn't know what is this contraption? I can carry my own groceries. That's fine. So Goldman actually hired models to push the baskets through the store and to use peer pressure on shoppers. He instructed them to say things like, "Why aren't you using one of these trendy new shopping carts?" And so eventually shoppers warmed to the idea of being able to push their own shopping cart through the aisles. But this is another stage of moving some of the labor of moving groceries from the shelves to the register, moving that burden to shoppers and taking it away from labor that the store has to pay for. I would add self-checkout, right, as part of this long tradition. When you check out your own groceries, you are the cashier. You're doing the labor. You have to tell the machine, how many cucumbers you're buying and what kind of cucumber is it? How many mushrooms, or excuse me, what kind of mushrooms are those? Brown or porcini or whatever. Um, and you have to enter your payment method and you have to answer questions like, do you want your receipt by email or whatever? And so this is part of this tradition of stores for more than 100 years have been trying to shift that burden onto shoppers. And but that does create tensions, right? It adds to these sort of tense relations between customers and shoppers. I will say that on the job, most of the worst interactions I had with some rude customers, some abusive customers happened at self-checkout. At the regular check stand, you kind of know that you're dealing with a human being. This is a human-centered space. We're talking to another person. But at self-checkout, when you're a shopper and that light flashes and there's a problem or you get an error message on the screen, you're already annoyed, you're already frustrated. By the time the cashier comes over to help you, you might already be ready to to jump down their throats. And so a lot of arguments, tensions occur at the self-checkout as cashiers and workers are trying to navigate this system. I had one colleague who told me he actually enjoyed working at the self-checkout because he said it allows me to be condescending to shoppers who don't know what they're doing. So for employees too, they could sort of take out some of their anger on shoppers at the self-checkout by letting them sit there and struggle with the machine.
Wow, yeah, some very interesting examples, especially in the supermarket, from how those tensions can grow since the institution itself has put some of those burdens on the customer. And then also, could it be a relief for some workers from how that tension is taken out, like just interconnecting webs? So I think taking that into account, how can we reorient conversations and shared responsibilities within the labor movement to maybe repair, but also just like strengthen the relationship between workers and consumers?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One of the reasons I wrote the book is to sort of bust this myth that shoppers and workers are on opposite sides. They're on opposite sides of the check stand, right? But they have overlapping concerns and interests. Um, and for example, we have this mythology in America that says if we raise the wages of this person who's selling us a good or service, then prices are going to go up. We're all going to suffer if the cashier at the supermarket makes a couple dollars more an hour. And this is false. As folks on this call probably know all too well, the truth is that lots of variables go into how much a case of soda or a pint of yogurt costs at the grocery store, and how much people are paid, and whether or not one big reason, which we've been discussing, is union power, whether workers have any collective bargaining rights. And in terms of prices, we know that corporations have the power to simply charge customers whatever they think they'll pay. We saw this during the pandemic. Retailers boosted prices and they said, oh, it's because of supply chain problems, or we're passing on just these legitimate costs to customers during this crisis. But it was revealed later by different studies that that wasn't the case. Companies were price gouging. They were raising costs because they could. Nobody was stopping them. There are laws against this kind of behavior that aren't being enforced. Um, and and so the myth that customers and shoppers are sort of antagonists, that are there on opposite sides, and is wrong. I think that we have shared concerns, shared needs. Everybody wants to live in a society, or most of us do, where people earn a fair wage and where groceries are priced fairly, where people can afford to eat. And our mutual enemy is corporate power. And that's where we need to focus our organizing energy.
Wonderfully said. And I think I would like to zoom into how we talk about the supermarket as an institution. I think one of my favorite aspects was what you were bringing up about the transition to these mega corporate supermarkets that started out as mom and pop shops. I was not aware about a lot of the history of how this transition has happened. So you bring in specific dates, stores like Piggly Wiggly, who really were changing that relationship.
Mhm.
We talk about how it changed the relationship between shoppers and workers, but I'm interested to hear how has the transition changed the grocery store's relationship with the community.
Yeah, this is such an important and fascinating history. I mentioned in my book, I traced the grocery store back to the early 20th century when most stores were these kind of independently owned mom and pops with the products behind the counter. And in that era, the guy who was behind the counter was probably the owner of the store, but he was also your neighbor. You knew him. Stores were community spaces. You'd show up to buy your groceries, and all your neighbors were in there, and you'd chat or gossip. The guy who owned the store, who worked there, he knew you and your family. He knew something about your financial situation. This was really important because mom and pops offered lines of credit to shoppers. The grocery guy would let you take, your carton of eggs and pint of milk home to your family if your factory was on strike, right? If your husband had lost his job. I say husband because most grocery shoppers were women at the time. So the grocery store was a community space. It was also a financial lifeline. You could rely on this on the supermarket on the grocery guy to help you out. There were tensions there, to be sure. It was a tense environment for women shoppers who had to negotiate with this man behind the counter who had a lot of authority to determine prices and to decide what quality of goods to give them. Black shoppers, for example, ran into constant racial discrimination in grocery stores. They were treated very, very poorly, sold low quality goods. A clerk might like put a piece of gum on the bottom of a scale to raise the price. Horrible treatment like this. So there's definitely, it's complicated, but at least these stores were community centers and you knew the grocer and you were keeping your money in the community. But then over time, this is starting in the 1920s, certainly 1930s, corporations start to take over. And these are companies that we know today, like Kroger and Safeway. And the biggest at the time was called the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, or A&P. And these companies started buying out mom and pops, replacing them with chains. And to the point where just within a couple decades, by about mid-century, most people are shopping at these big corporate chains. The transition didn't go smoothly. Shoppers, recognized that they were losing something, that these community stores were important to the economic and social life of the neighborhood. And at least the man behind the counter could be kind of annoying and patronizing and racist, but at least he was your neighbor, and you knew him. So there was a backlash against the corporate takeover. There was pretty fervent and large anti-chain store movement in the 20s and 30s. Shoppers' main demand at that point was they wanted the government to tax these stores to sort of level the playing field for the smaller mom and pops. But corporations eventually won that battle. And one way they did it was by lowering prices. A big corporation, then as now, could sell in really high volume, and that allowed them to sell certain items for less. They called them loss leaders. So A&P was an originator of this strategy. In the 1910s, the company it was at that point the largest retailer in the country and one of the largest in the world. It opened what it called economy stores, and A&P sold these basic goods for less. And shoppers couldn't afford to walk away from those savings, so they flocked to these chains that were cutting costs. And other stores followed A&P's model. So corporate chains kind of won the battle over the grocery store in that in that moment in history by cutting prices. We know that didn't continue. Corporate concentration now means higher prices, historically speaking. But in that moment, that's how that lowering prices helped the corporations to win that battle. There was another benefit to corporate stores, and that was standardization and centralization. You'd walk into one mom and pop, and it was different than the one down the street. You never knew what you're going to get. In a corporate store, service was standardized. They posted prices. Everyone paid the same. This was especially beneficial to Black customers during the Jim Crow era. Black shoppers in the North found that mom and pops were much like their Southern counterparts. They were treated horribly. They were racist clerks. So for them, these corporate stores were great. You could go in, you paid the same price as a white shopper. You were treated basically the same as a white shopper. And this, to be clear, this wasn't because corporations were cared about civil rights or were doing some kind of anti-racism. It's because it was just more efficient and less expensive to just simply have an efficient and streamlined sales process where everybody was treated the same. So we have this kind of complicated legacy where the mom and pop had all these problems, but it did offer a community space. It was something that shoppers valued. It felt like a pillar of the community. But then the corporate stores come in and they do offer some benefits, but all of a sudden we've lost our community stores. And this is another point of tension between shoppers and the industry.
No, wow. Very, very fascinating history of how the growth of these corporations in the name of convenience and quickness have kind of eroded this relationship within the community, which doesn't mean it's all bad for what they offer, but obviously explains a lot of those tensions in terms of human to human interactions.
Yeah, and
Now,
just to add one more thing, these days, like only about 3 or 4 companies sell almost all the groceries we buy. There's 3 or 4 big players. And so the industry has become extremely concentrated to the point where if you sometimes think you're walking into like a boutique store that is maybe a local chain or even a mom and pop, and that's probably not the case. If you do the research, it's probably a Kroger store. It's probably owned by Albertsons or one of the big four.
yeah, you've talked about that in the book. You named a store that I thought was actually local, artisanal that I had been to. And then when I saw the name dropped and I heard that it was actually a chain store, I was like,
Right.
oh wow. I didn't realize like it truly is really three or four really big players. Now, even talking about like this growth and the different changes, you also previously brought this up about self-checkout and automation and how it's often been pushed as a time saver for both workers and consumers. In this case, it's been self-checkout, I think is probably the biggest introduction to the
Hmm.
supermarket space. But like you explained in the case of self-checkout machines that were introduced at your grocery store, this was not often the case. It wasn't often convenient. It was breaking down. A lot of times it even took you
Hmm.
guys more time just to fix what was going on with the machines because they still needed a human touch. However, I think I like to see the counter of like that doesn't mean automation can't be helpful for all parties involved. So, just using that example, is there a way that employers can still introduce automation attempts that is still worker and consumer oriented?
That's such a great question. I think I'll start by just telling the story of the self-checkout in my store because when I got the job there, there were no self-checkout machines. It was all regular check stands. And customers would ask us, they would say, like, why don't you have these, machines? Customers under the impression that it's more convenient, that it's faster. And we were told, management told us to answer the question by saying, oh, we want every customer here to have the human-centered service. And that sounded great to me. But a few months after I started working there, we'd got a memo that the store was replacing about a third of the check stands with self-checkout. So this sent shockwaves through the store. This was huge news. And so I was there the day that these workers came in and they ripped the old registers out of the floor. And this is incredibly dramatic moment, and customers and workers are looking on, and they're carting these check stands away like old appliances. And there's these holes in the floor, and these black wires are sticking out. And workers were really concerned. For one thing, colleagues in my store really took pride in offering great customer service. They didn't want shoppers to go through a machine. They liked there's customer service is not inherently demeaning or unpleasant. There were many wonderful interactions between customers and shoppers, and we took pride in that. And so to think about our customers just going and punching a button and leaving, this was unpleasant for us. And also workers worried about losing their jobs. Does this mean that you're going to start firing people or maybe not hiring because now you've got the machines to do the work? Management denied this. They said that this wasn't going to lead to job loss, but of course, we didn't trust them. Um, I think the lesson of that period is, we need to understand the limits of automation and don't believe the hype, is another way to put it. I did not find in my experience with these machines that those machines replaced people, at least not in the way we might think. Um, it actually created new tensions and new work requirements. If you think about it, employees have to learn how to use these machines. All of a sudden, we have a new skill that we need to learn that we're not being paid, we weren't paid extra for. We joked at the store that the self and self checkout was kind of a joke. Really, what happens is, as I alluded to earlier, shoppers are checking themselves out, but they don't know how to use those machines. They don't know how to fix an error, or when a question pops up on the screen, they don't necessarily know the answer. So they have to wave down, the cashier. So this is more like the shoppers are joining the workers in the labor of checking themselves out. And so in my store, you would have one cashier that was in charge of six self-checkout machines. And so on one hand, that does seem like, oh, you're replacing workers because there would be six cashiers and now there's only one. And that's true to a certain extent. But what I found as a supervisor is the machines glitched and broke down all the time. There were constant problems. And so what that meant is I spent a lot of time on the phone calling tech support. So I'd be on the phone calling this tech support hotline, asking questions. How do I fix this? What do I do to fix that? So this is now a uh, workers who are on the other end of the phone that are being paid by the grocery company to answer my questions to help fix these machines. If some machine really broke down, which happened pretty regularly, these guys would show up. It was kind of amazing, like with like screwdrivers hanging from their belts, and they like opening panels and checking wires, like they're working on an oil rig or something. And so this is another group of workers that have to be hired to do the job. And meanwhile, while I'm on the phone trying to fix problems and talking to tech support, I'm not at the register helping workers. I'm not in the aisles helping shoppers find what they're looking for. Um, so I think there are uh, I could imagine a store that has self-checkout machines, and that, what I think needs to happen is, yeah, there have to be laws about how many employees are required to monitor those machines. I think one person for six machines, this is a recipe for tension, for frustration, for anger. I talk in the book, one of the reasons I ended up leaving the job when I did is because of an angry customer at the self-checkout machine. So I think there are, in I think Long Beach, California, the city passed a law mandating how many workers can be assigned or need to be assigned to work the self-checkout machines. And this is in response to a union-led pressure campaign because workers are saying, look, we're being overburdened here. Shoppers aren't receiving good service. And by the way, the store is having to hire all these tech support people to come in and fix problems, and they're not really saving on labor anyway. Um, so I don't know. I think I'm not opposed. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not opposed to automation in the grocery store. Obviously, even a digital check stand is a form of automation technology. But what I think is that workers need to have a voice in that how automation is deployed. Unions need to be involved, and it needs to be something that serves shoppers and serves workers and makes the whole store continues this tradition of a community space and doesn't isn't just an attempt by management to save a few bucks on labor.
Fully agree. I was just really interested to like I told before this conversation, I was telling Anne about how I worked at a grocery store during the same period and I had a lot of the same experiences I had like with the self-checkout and then going back to being just a consumer, you realize how that tension like lies like in this automation and making this so much easier. It's actually making it harder for everybody involved, for the consumer and also for the worker. It's adding unpaid labor, extra time. It still needs a human touch to it. So
Yeah.
I think
And they're
that is
not faster, right?
yeah, they're not
Research,
fast.
it seems like I'm getting in and out of the store really fast because I'm checking myself out. And that may be true in some acute instances, but research shows, I researched the book, there is no evidence that self-checkout is faster. It's simply not the case. You're doing the work, you're answering the questions, you're weighing the zucchini. When a cashier does that for you, it can be quicker. So that it's actually not more convenient and not faster. It's that's what they want you to think.
Especially on the point that you had about like even workplace injuries for cashiers, then the consumer could also be hurting themselves if they have something heavy and they have to do that.
Yeah.
They have to lug their water
Good
up
point.
or
Excellent point.
those or those bigger things. So I thought that was like something very interesting. But yeah, going on to and zooming back into like the workers, I loved this specificity that you had on like working and living with dignity as you were talking about, your unionizing efforts and what you think that you and your colleagues deserve, even as low-wage workers. And I especially loved how you highlighted also like your older low-wage workers. So you talked about this tale of two retirements that I think that I've seen it that there's this idea that like every boomer or like every like elder like older like worker is like on their way to like a great retirement. They have like the funds that they need. They're going to retire with like healthy wages and savings, and that isn't the case, especially for older low-wage workers. So you talk about this tale of two retirements, and you also mention economist Teresa Giladucci's Gray New Deal proposal in regard to older low-wage workers. So I just love to hear you talk a little bit more about these proposals and how they connect to older low-wage workers as challenges to working and living with dignity.
Yeah, this was also something, the presence of elderly people in the retail industry is something that I learned on the job that I wasn't expecting. There are growing numbers of elderly people staffing our supermarkets. And this is because Social Security does not afford a livable retirement. People can't afford to live. And also, Teresa Ghilarducci, who you mentioned, is a labor economist. I think she's at the New School. She connects us to the 2008 economic crisis when a lot of baby boomers lost their homes during the Great Recession. This was the nest egg that a lot of them planned to retire on. And when that was wiped out, they ended up at Walmart or at your local supermarket. Let me also just connect this to back to my store. I worked in a TGS with a woman who was 79 years old. And when I got the job there, she'd already been there 9 years. And I asked her, why are you still working at the supermarket well past retirement age? And her answer was very interesting. She told me first that she loved working there, that she liked her customers, that she was like a star in the store. She knew all the customers' names. She liked to chat with the kids who came through the check stand. She passed out candy. And so she told me, well, I don't want to be home by myself. I like coming in here and having a job. But she also admitted I can't live on my Social Security, and I can't if I don't have this job, I won't survive. And I really her situation really became clear to me one day because I was her supervisor. She would call in sick quite a bit and when she was ill and she would always say, please mark it down as a vacation day. She'd worked at the store so long she had vacation time saved up. She said, please mark it down as a vacation day because if you don't, I won't be able to pay my rent. In other words, one missed day at work risked her housing, missed losing her housing. So she never took a real vacation with her vacation days. She just kind of saved them up so that she could use them as like de facto sick days when she became ill. And this person also had a lot of health problems. She had kidney disease. So her ankles would sometimes swell up and she couldn't walk, and that was one reason she had to go home sometimes. She was supposed to do dialysis regularly, but she could only do dialysis on the weekend because she had to work at the store during the week. And so her doctor told her, you really should be coming in doing your dialysis more often, but she didn't do it. So this created huge health problems with her, and I talk about her health declining in the store while I was working there. So what's the solution, right, to these elderly people in the store? I mean, I think that Ghilarducci talks about the Gray New Deal, something like a um, publicly funded pension, for workers that would afford people a dignified retirement. I think that sounds great. I also wonder, though, I'll tell you another story. I had another colleague who, if you're working in a manual labor job your whole life, you're not going to make it till 65 or 67 or whatever retirement age is now. You are simply not going to make it. Your body's going to break down before that. And I saw this multiple times. I had another colleague who he was probably around 59, 60, so he couldn't retire yet, but he had a stroke. And so he was out of work for several months. In fact, when I got the job, he was gone. He wasn't in the store because he was at home recovering. He, but then he started to try to come back to the store a few months later, and he wanted his job back because he told me, I've lost my health insurance, I've lost my income, I don't have any money. And you could tell that he physically wasn't ready to come back. He was very thin, very weak from his ordeal, but he was desperate to come back to the job. Eventually, they let him come back, but he was extremely fatigued and tired. He had a hard time making it through a shift. I used to walk by his check stand and he would be like gripping the counter and he'd like white knuckles, gripping the counter, trying to stand up just to make it through. Um, and then one day when he was walking from the time clock to his check stand, he fell and fractured his arm. So again, he's off. He can't work. He can't work with one arm at the supermarket. So again, he's back home recovering, and with no money, losing his health insurance and all that. So this is another this complicates even the story of a Grey New Deal or publicly funded pension. Manual workers like this, they are not going to make it to 65. We need other systems in place to help people. Medicare for all, to me, is a great idea. This person, if he at least had access to health insurance while he was recovering from injury, I think that would have eliminated a lot of his stress. And maybe a public pension system for manual workers that they can start drawing on if they're sick or injured, before the traditional retirement age. The supermarket, again, back to my metaphor of the split screen. We often think of the store as a place where young people or teenagers, college students work in, get some experience until they move on to their real jobs. But that's less and less the case. What you see in stores now is a lot of older workers who are just trying to hang on.
Wow. No, thank you so much, especially for talking about those struggles for elder workers. It's definitely like their labor and their experience can be seen, but often the hardships that they face is not talked about. But there are so many questions that I could definitely like keep asking you about. There's so much that I know is in this book. However, I think we can go into our Q&A section because I think we have some questions for the audience. So at this time, I'll invite the audience to join us for our Q&A portion of today's conversation so they can join into this discussion. So as of this time, either you can drop a question in the chat, I think we already have one, or you can use the raise hand function if you have a question that you'd like to voice out to Anne yourself. So while maybe some people are queuing up, we already have one question from Beverly Moran. So her question is, companies seem to constantly save time by cutting salary costs. How much do they actually save? It seems that the salaries that they pay are so low, it is hard to imagine that these companies actually save money, especially if they raise the salaries of executives who are responsible for the job cuts.
It's a great question. This is, one of the contradictions of capitalism, right? Like I think grocery companies would, in some ways, do better if they paid a living wage and gave their employees health insurance. Like, look at this story that I just told of this man, in 60 years old man. He wanted to work. He wanted to come back to his job, um, but he was sick and injured and had no way to do that, and no way to recover. Because he had no income. In a lot of ways, unionized workforce where workers are happier, where they can contribute, where they have a collective voice in their labor conditions. This improves the lives of grocery workers, and they'll offer better customer service. They'll be happier to come to work. There's very high turnover in the retail industry. Lots of people, I observe this many times. People come in, work for a few weeks, they get a sense of how hard the job is, or they find something better and they leave. So there's lots of high turnover. Companies it's expensive to train new workers. So it would benefit them if there was more stable workforce that wanted to be there. But their short-term costs, the short-term desire to profit doesn't allow for that. I also think we need to consider there's this myth that retail companies are operating on. I've heard this a million times in my press tour for the book. Retail companies are operating on these like very thin margins, and it's like really there's really not a lot of profit in it, and that's totally wrong. Corporations are doing gangbusters right now. They're making huge profits, historic level profits. During the pandemic, I think it's Kroger this is what they do with their money is they do these stock buybacks to shareholders. Kroger did one of the largest stock buybacks, $1 billion to shareholders that had ever done in its history. Costco spent more on stock buybacks during that period than they paid for employee retirement plans. So the low wages and the high prices at the grocery store are benefiting a very few number of stockholders. And that's the financial model of these companies are not just selling a service, selling a product, selling a service, and taking that profit and then putting it back into the business. Not at all. These are financialized companies that are lining the pockets of the shareholder class. So yeah, they're I don't know how much money they're saving in terms of a dollar amount, but I know that they're deeply interested in maintaining this kind of short-term profit churn, and they don't care at all about worker safety, workers' health. And as long as they can get somebody to replace the person that, like my colleague that fell and broke his arm, they're perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, I think we have another question from Toyosi Osala.
Yes, thank you, Anna and Joma, for this discussion. I have a question that it's not fully formed yet, but listening to this discussion, I want to add that I also worked at a grocery store during COVID. It was like a big corporation, and there was simultaneously I really enjoyed the experience, but there was this like overhanging feeling of like, you know, feeling like you were like a tool, kind of
Mhm.
your body was being used, your labor was being used. And throughout the store, there was just this feeling of like inefficiency everywhere. Like you mentioned with this self-checkout needing multiple cashiers just to help everyone out. The lines are usually longer with self-checkout, at least in my experience. You needed security guards because people used to just take things from self-checkout. And there are all these like I used to work in the aisles, I was dry goods, so I would move
Mhm.
product. And there were like so many times when, it would just be me doing things and like things would break because I'd have to be rushing and so many items would spoil. And there was just like this feeling around the grocery store that there was just so much money bleeding. And yet they were trying to push people into part-time roles to get them off of health insurance. And so like thinking in that context and thinking about your history of the evolution of the grocery store, I'm wondering, I'm trying to connect it all together. Like publicly run grocery stores are this kind of new th I don't know if they're
Mhm.
new. I would love to hear your take on the history of like where if they have occurred a lot in the past, but like as the kind of next stage in groceries where without that need for short-term profit, like being able to actually run efficiently. I think that's I the idea that grocery stores are losing money is just I didn't even know that was a thing people were bringing up because there's just so much money lost everywhere. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I would help to throw out all the lost items that were either just like a damaged box. The item in there was still good. Like there's just so much money bleeding. So like, do you see public grocery stores kind of as the new frontier in this, or do you see them kind of functioning within this still larger issue of the grocery stores just not being that functional?
Oh my gosh, you've said so many interesting things, and I want to talk about all of them. I'm so glad that you mentioned shoplifting and shrink, right? The industry calls it shrink. There's a lot of waste at the grocery store. I talk about in my book that a lot of the products that come in, they just get thrown in the trash. I mean, it's a huge amount. It's incredible the amount of waste that goes on. And the shoplifting at self-checkout, we didn't even get to talk about it. It's like there is so much I every day, multiple times a day, many people are shoplifting at the store. Most of them are hungry, right? Most of them, most at least in my experience, what I observe is people that are t literally taking something right off the shelf and putting it into their mouth. That's because they're hungry. But self-checkout's a huge. There's a big flashing sign at self-checkout that says "Shoplifters welcome." And and you experience too is the dry goods that the heavy lifting and the labor and how difficult that all is. So many interesting things there that are very important. I love what Mandani is doing, what he's proposing to do with public grocery stores in New York City. This is really exciting to me. I municipal grocery stores like this, and we could maybe include cooperatives in there, these kind of alternative models to the corporate store. As you alluded to, these are not a new idea. There's a long history that we can trace back. I trace it in the book back to Black shoppers who experienced racism and discrimination in the stores. So they went off and opened their own outlets. We have many examples of cooperatives and municipal stores that were run by and for Black shoppers who wanted to keep money in their community and not to trade with the racist grocery industry. There's also many contemporary examples. I like to point to what's happening on U.S. military bases. We have a government-run commissary system where enlisted people and their families can buy subsidized food. It's about 20% less than at the regular supermarket. There are hundreds of these commissaries at military bases all over the world. And this is just the government subsidizing food for a group of people that need it for less. Nobody questions this. Nobody thinks it's a communist plot or some horrible thing. This is the government doing its job to provide an affordable option. And I think I see public grocery stores as part of that tradition. I there's a long way to go. Uh, I talked a little bit about the power of these big three, big four retail companies. They have a lot of lobbying power, a lot of money. They donate to a lot of politicians, and they don't want to see alternatives popping up in our communities. So it's very hard to open a municipal store, public store, because as I mentioned earlier, corporations can offer lower prices if they want because they can buy in volume. So there's going to be a pushback against municipal stores. It's a long road to get them to be functional. And I don't think we should have illusions about that, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. And it's part of this long history of trying to create alternatives, trying to introduce social justice into this food space. Um, uh, and I think you're right. It could address some of these problems of waste and lack of efficiency. These corporate stores, they buy so much. In my store, we had a rotisserie chicken case, and one of the people that worked in the deli told me that case was supposed to be full at all times because it looked abundant, it looked inviting. Nobody wants to walk up to the rotisserie chicken case and there's like one chicken spinning in there. And so at the end of the night, they would throw away the chickens that didn't sell. So he told me we throw away like 15, 20 chickens every night because the case has to be full at all time. So anyway, I think you're absolutely right. And part of the job of creating alternatives is trying to not waste food as we're doing now.
I think that was a great note to end off on about we've talked about the grocery store as an institution, these tensions, but there are alternative models, at least like to provide an idea of what the path forward is, as they are these really large like vehicles within the community space. So thank you so much, Anne, for
Thank
joining me
you.
today in this conversation. I thoroughly love this book. Whether you're in the audience and you have read this book or you're thinking of reading this book, it is a really great read that definitely represents so many topics that are important in today's policy conversations. So if for those of you who are still on, you look in the chat there, we have links for purchasing the book, for purchasing Clean Up on Aisle 5 so it can be yours and you can read so much more about these topics. It's one thing to hear about them, but is another to read it and see Anne's experiences through her eyes and in her writing. And thank you again to the Economic Hardship Reporting Project for co-hosting this event with us. We have also dropped information in the chat if you would like to learn more about their work. That is also in there. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please stay tuned for updates on our next talk. So, and until next time.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.